Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, let me try that again. It's lonely up here. I need you to work with me. Good afternoon. All right. We were asked to share our thoughts about partnerships, airport, retailer, and supplier. And in wanting to contribute as a supplier, I felt the best way I could was to take very seriously our conference theme, to think bold and act different. So I set a goal for myself. Step back from today's reality and instead think bold about how our partnership might work. What if we could focus less on the issues that divide us and tackle together instead the opportunities that unite us? How would we act different to gain better results for us all? Our Think Bold theme reminded me of Star Trek. Although it was only fiction, its famous catchphrase, "To boldly go where no man has gone before," came from reality, a United States document on space flight. One of the aspects of that show that made it famous in its time was its depiction of collaboration among different races, genders, and planetary species. Collaboration is something I think we can use more of. So how do we progress by thinking bold about our universe, the business of travel retail? At the Medfa conference in Dubai last year and elsewhere, Phil Humphreys, Diageo's managing director for global travel and Middle East, has expressed a desire to double the size of the liquor category in travel retail. Obviously, we at Patron would like that. But let's think even more boldly. What would it take to double the size of the entire business? The first step, I think, is to be realistic about what is. Then, to think boldly about how we can make it better. So what is today's reality? First, let's acknowledge that we in travel retail actually represent a number of diverging interests, airport, retailer, and supplier alike. We are not all neatly aligned, and there is no single picture on how a three-way partnership should work. We each move in our own directions. One illustration of a lack of uniformity in the world of travel retail is the topic of airport contracts, which you've heard a number of times this morning. Contract duration vary. Some are renewed after only 3 years, many must be renewed after 5 years, and so on. Simply to state reality, the duration of an airport contract can have a tremendous impact on how much investment a retailer is willing to make in creating a compelling experience at the airport. To make up an example, wouldn't you be more willing to spend what it takes to install in an airport the infrastructure for a 3D IMAX theater if you knew you had 10 years or more to amortize the cost of that investment? I cannot fault the retailer for choosing to be cautious about installing expensive infrastructures, which might be torn down after 5 years, or worse yet, might help a competitor. I know that this session is called a tender success. In my opinion, one of the best ways to potentially increase the success of our tenders is to build longer-term contracts into the supplier, retailer, and brand partnership. Of course, we suppliers will always do our best to create an appealing showcase for our products. Retailers and suppliers will always be interested in attention-getting communications like this versatile wall of video displays behind the Patron tasting unit at Heathrow Airport. Here is where we as a supplier once again experienced the engaging consumer in truly a best practice. Our live mixology demonstrations of the many ways to use Patron gave us a 500% sales increase in this duty-free environment. And that underscores the fact that there's tremendous untapped potential from travel retail consumers. Suppliers will always look for ways to bring attention to our products, even with airport contracts only 5 years in duration. But longer contracts, in my opinion, would encourage and allow retailers to think bolder than before, with the different and larger investments in exciting point-of-sale attractions. Let me cite an example of Dubai Duty Free. They recently reported record first-quarter sales with an increase of 21% to over $307 million US. Dubai Duty Free, as we all know, is owned by Dubai Airports, so they never have to worry about the contract being expired. Now consider the retail environment there. How do they make so much money? In part, I would suggest with consistent investment from all parties. Since Dubai Duty Free never has to worry about being kicked out of the Dubai airport, they can afford to think bold about investments that will impress and attract the traveling consumer. The security of that tenure is real and an important factor in making this retail environment one of the best in the world. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm definitely not suggesting that all airports in the world rush right out and buy all the retailers. All I'm saying is this: we can learn from Dubai about the value of helping retailers worry less about tenure. Longer contract terms could be a big help with that. Now let me mention another reality which reflects our divergent interests in the different roads we follow. We are sometimes asked as suppliers, what would it take for us to make greater investments in our partnerships with retailers? I have two answers to that. First, we are always happy to work with any incumbent retailer to invest in long-term merchandising that makes good sense for us both. But about divergent interests. In bid situations with one retailer competing against another, it's just about impossible for any supplier to choose sides as a part of that bid, not just for Patron, but for any global supplier. Many of us have ongoing relationships with multiple retailers globally. We need to be cooperative with all of them, even as they compete with one another. So let's look at the big picture, at the interests that pull us together, and at some ways that thinking boldly could benefit every one of us. We should actually be united in competing for consumers with their time, their attention, and their travel retail spending. Wouldn't it be great if a consumer thought to himself, I'm glad I have a scheduled trip that will take me to the airport, not through the airport, but to the airport, because the airport has become so interesting, such an exciting place to be. I'm going to plan to spend more time at the airport every time I travel. But that is exactly what bold thinking is about, being willing to envision changing whatever exists. Our relationship to each other is often about competing to see who can take away a bigger slice of the pie. But I ask you this: what would happen instead if we could focus some of our energy on making the total pie bigger, on attracting more consumers to shop duty-free? What if duty-free shopping were to become, all over the world, a more desirable and popular way for people to get whatever they want and enjoy the way they do it? All of us would benefit. But how do we get from here to there? How do we all get a bigger share of consumer spending around the world? Making our pie bigger to the detriment of our real competitors. Our real competitors who are shopping malls, department stores, and even internet shopping. Department stores like Takashimaya in Tokyo, they work very hard to make their stores appealing destinations, a place to visit because it's interesting. According to a report by global industry analysts, by 2015, department store sales should reach $424 billion. Today's department store business is now being eroded by specialized retailers and by discounters and by supermarkets. But they don't have short-term contracts to worry about. They are doing their best to develop new ideas that improve the shopping experience. This, for example, is a robot receptionist at Takashimaya. Her name is Saya, and she can provide about 700 program responses to questions and commands that shoppers ask all day long. Someone had to think bold in order to invest in this technology and prominently install it in this world-famous store. Let's talk about another competitor of ours, another channel that consumers could choose instead of shopping at travel retail locations: the Internet. Only a decade ago, at the end of 2000, the number of Internet users on Earth was 360 million, and now has quadrupled to over 1.7 billion people. It's very difficult to know how much that usage translates into sales, but stats from the IDC suggest that e-commerce revenues now exceed $2.4 trillion. If we could attract 0.1% of those sales to the travel retail market, we would increase our revenues by about $10 billion each and every year. The trouble is, we're all so busy every day competing against one another. We're not putting enough energy into taking business from our real competitors, from department stores to the Internet. So let's think bold together. Nearly 65 years ago, another bold thought was turned into actions when the United Nations was formed. Today it includes 192 member states, nearly every sovereign country in the world. I'm not saying that it or any organization is perfect in every way, but the UN is a forum where its members often find common interests and contribute to the greater good. What if we could achieve, aside from the ways we compete with one another, collaboration, and at least in more ways be like the United Nations? One thing we could do would be helpful to us all is to gain and to share more and better research on shopping attitudes worldwide. Let me acknowledge right away that TFWA and others already supply today some very valuable research. It is useful to a beverage alcohol supplier like Patron to know which wine and spirit brands Japanese consumers aspire to and then which they actually purchase. This kind of data is available to us all as TFWA members. All of that is good, but what valuable information do we not have today that could benefit us all? If it helped us get consumers to shop in duty-free, not just shop, but shop there more often. It would certainly cost money to conduct more in-depth research, more sophisticated research of global consumer attitudes towards duty-free shopping. But to think even more creatively, what experiences at airports would make them want to shop there more often? Conventional thinking is a trap. Thinking bold is where the gold is. Here's an example of that from my industry. During the last 2 years, all of us have experienced one of the greatest economic downturns in memory. Most suppliers in beverage alcohol reacted by cutting back with less advertising and promotion, and Patron did just the opposite. As Bloomberg and others have widely reported, we increased our advertising and we kept on brand building. We supported our retailers by continuing to build perceived value of our brands. I'll tell you what, it took some real courage, but I'm glad we acted in that manner. Our brands are stronger than ever as a result. But what's the parallel to travel retail? The World Tourism Organization has estimated that international tourist arrivals in 2009 suffered a 4% decline, down to 880 million travelers. But let's not fall back and retrench the way some of my colleagues did. Let's think of duty-free shopping as a brand that belongs to all of us, a brand that we all need to build. So how can we get more of those travelers to want to spend more time with us and less with other choices they have in the marketplace? What if our industry, not just individual suppliers or retailers or airports, could think more creatively? To make my point, I'll draw once again on TFWA research, although it's somewhat dated. The research found that 3/4 of European air travelers enter a travel retail store at the airport, about half, and only half of them actually purchase. What would it take to get more passengers inside the travel retail stores in the first place? TFWA study also found that only 1/3 of Europe's traveling public purchased beverage alcohol. But why only 1/3? If a European marketer could find a way to increase that percentage, wouldn't all of us be interested in knowing how they did it? It's easy to say no automatically, but it's harder and obviously better to figure out how to achieve success. That's why I think we need to know more than all of us currently do. But how do we get the knowledge and the insight we need? There are many organizations representing duty-free one way or another, as airports, suppliers, or retailers, or in some combination. These few examples on screen are only a token handful. Many of those organizations, and many of us here, conduct our own research. But despite all that's going on, none of us has found a way to greatly expand the pie that all of us want a piece of. I want more of that department store pie. What if all our organizations joined forces? Could more investment in exploring bold new ideas ultimately allow us to make airports better magnets to pull in consumers? The research I envision would seek to uncover consumer insights to make the airport and all of us in it significantly more appealing as a shopping destination. Let's call it, for sake of the presentation, making the pie bigger research. Don't we all have a stake in making duty-free shopping more attractive to consumers? Not just those of us here this week, but anyone who's a part of the duty-free channel anywhere in the world. Whether TFWA unites with other organizations and creates a global United Nations of duty-free, or whether a totally new organization is eventually formed to become our own nonpartisan UN, I certainly don't pretend to have a roadmap from how we get from here to there. And while we're thinking more boldly about valuable information, let's also think boldly about ways we can share it. Can't we make greater use of the 21st century technologies we have? It would be relatively easy in 2010 to establish our own secure network for sharing industry information among everyone in duty-free globally and among all our companies and organizations, a network uniting us all. And while we're talking about using the internet for ourselves, let's also keep in mind using it to our advantage with consumers, not as a supplier, not as a retailer, not as an airport, but as the duty-free industry as a whole. Social networking sites are an example. I'm not referring to corporate websites like ours. I'm talking about the ways that more and more consumers can interact with each other on social networking sites. These are a growing phenomenon with over 500 million people worldwide using them. One network in China alone has over 300 million active accounts. Increasingly, marketeers are using them too, in addition to their regular websites, to interact with consumers and to help make themselves even more interesting and engaging. Maybe we could think more boldly about creative ways to use tools of social network and to heighten public interest in duty-free shopping. Maybe, for example, there could be a worldwide duty-free fan club and blogs for consumers who purchase from travel retail worldwide. Maybe there could even be contests sponsored by our own version of the Travel Retail UN. These would give consumers incentives to buy more at any airport. Again, I don't have the answers, but I do know that without a new way of thinking that has us all on the same side to increase our total business, we'll remain competitors of each other. We will miss the opportunities to compete against other channels and bring more business to us. If these ideas sound unrealistic to you, consider this. One of the most competitive industries on earth is the soft drink beverages. If Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper, PepsiCo can join forces like they're doing in the U.S. to remove sugared beverages from schools, then anyone can find common ground. Albert Einstein, as we all know, was one of the smartest men in the world. Here's what he observed. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. The power of thinking boldly is in what it can lead to, new ideas and better results. The thoughts I've shared today include the idea of longer contracts, give retailers the incentive to invest more. Let's all think bold enough to double our travel retail business. Let's all focus together on why consumers make the choices they do and how we as a partnership, airport, retailer, supplier, can be even more appealing as shopping destinations. Are we up to the task? It's all too easy to find the flaws in a new approach instead of finding the ways to help it get even better. I believe we've got a chance to create a whole new level of growth in travel retail. But it will only happen when we all face the fact that our biggest competitors aren't here with us today. They're out grabbing consumers before they get to the airport. A UN of travel retail, whatever it might be called, and however we arrive at it, could help make more of those consumers our own, if we actually have the imagination to make it happen. Thanks very much for your attention.